Penelope Davenport's voice, sharp as shattered glass, cut through the restaurant's gentle hum of quiet conversation and clinking silverware. She stared down at the young waitress, her eyes filled with a casual cruelty that was somehow more chilling than outright rage. "Is this really the best you could do with your life? Wiping tables and serving people like me?" The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The waitress, Khloe, felt 100 pairs of eyes on her cheeks burning with a shame that wasn't hers to bear. She stood frozen, a cheap pen clutched in her hand, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was just about to find a reply when the heavy oak door of the restaurant swung open, and the world as Penelope Davenport knew it, tilted on its axis forever. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't the most opulent restaurant in downtown Chicago, but it held a specific coveted charm. It was a place of old money and new ambition, where deals were brokered over age stakes and secrets were whispered over glasses of Burgundy. Its walls were paneled with dark, polished mahogany. The lighting was perpetually dimmed to a conspiratorial amber glow, and the staff moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of rigorous training and the expectation of hefty tips. For Khloe Evans, it was more than a job. It was a lifeboat. At 23, she should have been entering her final year of law school at Northwestern, buried in tours and case law. Instead, she was an expert on the subtle differences between a Cabernet Sauvignon and a Merlot, the precise temperature for a medium-rare filet mignon, and the art of being gracefully invisible. 6 months ago, her father's diagnosis had shattered her world like a dropped plate: aggressive pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was a grim countdown, and the experimental treatments not covered by their modest insurance were astronomically expensive. Her father, a proud history professor, had insisted she continue her studies, but Khloe couldn't. She couldn't sit in a lecture hall debating abstract justice while a very real injustice was consuming her family. So she had deferred her enrollment, tucked her dreams away in a dusty box, and picked up a black apron. The long hours and aching feet were a small price to pay for the cash that went directly to the mounting medical bills. Her mother, a freelance graphic designer, was working every waking hour, her face etched with a permanent worry that Khloe tried her best to soothe. Each night, Khloe would come home, the scent of expensive food clinging to her clothes, and count her tips on the worn kitchen table, a small soldier reporting the day's victories in a war she feared they were losing. Tonight was a typical Tuesday, a steady but manageable flow of patrons. Khloe moved through her section with a practiced ease, her smile genuine, her service impeccable. She had a knack for anticipating needs: a refilled water glass, an extra napkin, a recommendation for the indecisive. She treated every customer with the same quiet respect, from the lone businessman reading a newspaper to the giggling couple on a first date. Then the Davenports arrived. They didn't walk in so much as make an entrance. Richard Davenport was a man in his late 40s, with a tailored suit that probably cost more than Khloe's last semester of tuition, and a weary, distracted air about him. He was a senior vice president at Sterling Global Investments, a name that carried immense weight in the city. But it was his wife, Penelope, who commanded the room's attention. She was a vision of curated perfection, from her platinum blonde hair sculpted into an elegant chignon to the diamonds that glittered at her ears and throat. Her dress was a sheath of emerald silk, and she carried a handbag that looked like it had its own security detail. Khloe's section was their destination. The hostess, a younger girl named Sarah, led them to the best booth, a plush, semicircular seat upholstered in deep red leather. From the moment Penelope sat down, the atmosphere curdled. "Is this the best you have?" Penelope asked, running a manicured finger along the pristine tablecloth as if searching for a flaw. Her voice was a low, melodic purr, but it had an edge of steel. "It's our most requested table, Mrs. Davenport," Sarah replied, her professional smile wavering slightly. Penelope sighed, a theatrical exhalation of profound disappointment. "I suppose it will have to do." Khloe approached the table, her own smile firmly in place. "Good evening. My name is Khloe, and I'll be your server tonight. Can I start you with some water? We have sparkling or still?" Richard Davenport gave her a brief, polite nod. "Still for me, please." Penelope didn't even look at her. She was scanning the restaurant, her lips pursed in a silent, critical assessment of the other patrons. Sparkling, with a thin slice of lime, not a wedge, and make sure the glass is chilled, but not frosted. I can't abide condensation. Of course, Khloe said, her pen poised over her notepad. It was a needlessly specific, almost provocative request, but Khloe had dealt with far worse. This was the opening salvo in a game she knew all too well, the game of establishing dominance over the help. She returned promptly with the water, served exactly as requested. Penelope took a small, critical sip. It's adequate. Are you ready to hear our specials for this evening? Khloe asked, keeping her tone light and professional. Penelope waved a dismissive hand, the diamonds on her bracelet catching the light. Just bring us a bottle of the 09 Chateau Margaux, and don't be clumsy with it. My husband had a very trying day. Khloe's training kicked in. The 09 Margaux was one of the most expensive wines on their list, a 4-figure bottle. An excellent choice, madam. I'll just need a moment to retrieve it from the cellar. As she walked away, she heard Penelope's voice drift towards her. No longer a purr, but a sharp whisper directed at her husband. Did you see her shoes? Dreadful. You'd think a place like this would have a stricter dress code for the staff. Khloe's hands tightened into fists at her side, her knuckles white. She wore sensible, comfortable black orthopedic shoes, the only kind that could get her through a 10-hour shift without leaving her in agony. They were clean and polished, but they were not designer. The comment was small, petty, and designed to sting. She took a deep breath, picturing her father's face, the way his eyes still lit up when she told him about her day, even when he was weak with pain. He was her reason. He was her armor. She could endure 1,000 comments about her shoes for him. She descended the narrow stairs to the cool, quiet cellar, the insult echoing in the silence. The storm was gathering, and she was standing right in the center of it. The ritual of presenting a fine wine was a piece of restaurant theater Khloe had perfected. She carried the bottle to the table in a proper cradle, displaying the label to Richard Davenport for his approval. He glanced at it, distracted, and gave a curt nod. Khloe proceeded with the uncorking, her movements fluid and economical. The cork came out with a soft, satisfying sigh, not a pop. She poured a small tasting for Richard. He swirled the deep red liquid, sniffed, and took a sip, his attention still seemingly elsewhere, likely on the multi-million-dollar deal his wife had alluded to. It's fine, he said, waving her on. As Khloe poured for Penelope, the woman watched her every move, her eyes narrowed. Don't overfill it, she commanded, just as Khloe was finishing a perfect pour. Amateurs always overfill the glass. My apologies, madam, Khloe said, though the pour was textbook. It's not about apologies, dear. It's about competence, Penelope replied, picking up her glass and examining it against the candlelight. The rest of the order was a similar ordeal. Penelope cross-examined Khloe on the provenance of the scallops, the fat content of the duck confit, and the exact ingredients of the vinaigrette on the house salad, which she then declared pedestrian and refused to order. She settled on the pan-seared branzino, but not without a list of modifications. I want it cooked through, but not dry. The skin must be crisp, but not burnt. And the lemon caper sauce on the side. A very small side. I'm watching my figure. Richard, to his credit, seemed increasingly uncomfortable. He ordered the ribeye with a simple, medium rare, please, and gave Khloe a look that was part apology, part weary resignation. He was a man accustomed to his wife's behavior, too tired or too intimidated to rein it in. The appetizers arrived. Penelope poked at her single oyster Rockefeller with a tiny fork as if it might be hostile. The breadcrumbs are unevenly toasted, she announced to the table, loud enough for adjacent diners to hear. It speaks to a lack of attention to detail in the kitchen. Khloe, who had just dropped off bread at the next table, overheard. She kept her back to them, her spine rigid. Attention to detail. The irony was thick enough to taste. Khloe's life was nothing but attention to detail. The precise dosage of her father's medication, the careful budgeting of every single dollar, the delicate balance of hope and despair she navigated every single day. Penelope, please, Richard murmured, his voice low. Just eat. I am merely making an observation, Richard, she shot back. Quality is quality. Some people understand it, and some people... She paused, letting her gaze drift pointedly towards Khloe, who was now clearing their appetizer plates. Don't. Khloe's smile was cemented on her face, a mask of professional courtesy. Inside, a cold knot of anger was tightening in her stomach. She had served entitled people before. It was part of the territory. But Penelope Davenport was different. There was a targeted personal venom in her condescension, a delight in making others feel small. It wasn't just about demanding good service. It was about asserting her own superiority by crushing someone else's spirit. When the main courses were served, the true performance began. Khloe placed the branzino in front of Penelope with a steady hand. Here is your pan-seared branzino, with the sauce on the side as you requested. Penelope stared at the plate for a long, dramatic moment. She picked up her fork and gently flaked a piece of the white fish. She brought it to her lips, chewed slowly, and then her face contorted into a mask of disgust. She delicately spit the mouthful into her napkin. This is utterly inedible, she declared. Richard sighed and put his head in his hands for a brief second. Khloe's heart sank. I'm very sorry to hear that, madam. Is there something wrong with it? Something wrong with it? Penelope laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. It's hopelessly overcooked. It's dry as sawdust. I specifically said I wanted it cooked through, not mummified. Did you fail to relay that to the chef? Or are you simply incapable of remembering a simple instruction? The accusation was sharp and unfair. Khloe had written the instructions down verbatim and had personally emphasized them to the head chef, a temperamental but brilliant man named Julian, who did not suffer fools gladly. She knew for a fact the fish had been cooked perfectly. I can assure you, I passed along your instructions precisely, Khloe said, her voice even but firm. Perhaps I could bring you something else? The kitchen would be happy to prepare another dish for you. And wait another 30 minutes while my husband finishes his meal? I think not, Penelope sneered. She pushed the plate away with a flick of her wrist. This entire experience has been a disaster, from the table to the incompetent service. It was then that she delivered the line that would echo in Khloe's mind for years to come. She looked Khloe up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that took in her simple black uniform, her sensible shoes, and the faint weariness around her eyes. You know, Penelope said, leaning forward as if sharing a profound secret, my father always told me that you can judge a person by the choices they make. And looking at you, she gestured vaguely at Khloe's entire existence. I must say, your choices are rather pathetic. Is this really the best you could do with your life? Wiping tables and serving people like me? Don't you have any ambition? Any dreams? The cruelty of the question stole the air from Khloe's lungs. Dreams. Her dreams were on hold, sacrificed at the altar of her family's needs. Her ambition was currently channeled into ensuring her father lived to see another birthday. This woman, draped in diamonds and privilege, knew nothing of the choices Khloe had made, or the heavy reasons behind them. She saw a waitress, a failure, a non-entity. Khloe's training, her practiced smile, her professional detachment, it all threatened to crumble. She could feel the hot sting of tears welling behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Penelope Davenport the satisfaction. My choices, Khloe said, her voice quiet but ringing with a sudden, steely clarity, are my own, and I am proud of them. Penelope scoffed. Pride? Darling, pride is for people who have actually accomplished something. Now just take this thing away and bring me the check. My appetite is ruined. As Khloe reached for the plate, her hand trembling ever so slightly, she knew the night was far from over. Penelope wasn't just a difficult customer. She was a bully who had chosen her as a target, and she wasn't done yet. The atmosphere at the table was now thick with a tension that could be cut with a steak knife. Richard Davenport ate his meal in silence, his jaw tight, refusing to meet his wife's eyes. Penelope sat with her arms crossed, radiating a triumphant displeasure, as if she had won some great victory. She had successfully soured the evening for everyone, including herself, and seemed to revel in the misery she had created. Khloe tried to avoid the booth, sending another waiter to refill Richard's water glass, but she knew she couldn't escape delivering the check. That was her responsibility. She returned to the table and was about to ask if they'd care for dessert or coffee, a standard part of the script, when Penelope decided on a new line of attack. "You're still hovering," Penelope said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Is there something else you need?" "I was just going to ask about dessert," Khloe replied, her patience stretched to a razor's edge. "Dessert? After you single-handedly ruined my dinner?" Penelope laughed again. "The audacity! It's almost impressive." She then turned her attention to the half-full glass of expensive red wine sitting in front of her. She picked it up, swirled it, and as Khloe leaned in slightly to clear the breadbasket, Penelope's hand jerked. The deep red liquid arced through the air, splashing across the pristine white front of Penelope's silk blouse, creating a ghastly spreading stain. Penelope gasped, a sound of pure theatrical shock. "Oh my God, look what you did!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. The entire restaurant, which had been trying its best to ignore the drama at the corner booth, now fell silent. Every eye turned towards them. Khloe froze, her hand still in midair. She hadn't touched Penelope. She hadn't even been close enough to jostle the table. It was an act, a deliberate, malicious piece of theater designed for maximum humiliation. "You clumsy, incompetent girl!" Penelope's voice rose in volume, sharp and hysterical. "This is a custom-made blouse. It's ruined, absolutely ruined." "Madam, Khloe began, but Penelope cut her off. "Don't you madam me! You did this on purpose. You were resentful because I pointed out your ineptitude, and you lashed out." Richard was on his feet now, dabbing at his wife's blouse with a napkin, his face a mask of frantic embarrassment. "Penelope, calm down. It was an accident." "It was not an accident, Richard. It was a deliberate assault," she cried, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at Khloe. "I want her fired. Right now. I want to speak to your manager this instant." The manager, a tall, perpetually stressed man named Mr. Harrison, was already gliding toward the table, his face a carefully blank canvas of professional concern. "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Davenport?" "A problem?" Penelope screeched. "Your waitress just assaulted me. She threw wine all over my designer blouse. I want her terminated immediately. This restaurant will be hearing from my lawyer." Mr. Harrison looked from Penelope's dramatic display to Khloe's pale, shocked face. Khloe had been one of his best employees for 6 months. She was reliable, graceful under pressure, and had never had a single complaint against her. He knew instinctively that something was very wrong with Penelope's story. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice low and calm, "what happened?" Before Khloe could speak, Penelope answered for her. "She'll lie, of course she'll lie. People like her, they have no integrity. They just try to get by, taking no responsibility for their failures." And that was it, the breaking point. It wasn't the false accusation. It wasn't the threat of being fired. It was the casual, sweeping dismissal of her character, of her very humanity. People like her, the phrase echoed with the weight of every silent judgment she had ever endured. Khloe thought of her father in his hospital bed, fighting with every ounce of his being, a man who had spent his life teaching integrity and honor. She thought of her mother, her fingers stained with ink, working through the night. They were people like her. Something inside Khloe shifted. The fear and humiliation receded, replaced by a surge of cold, clear anger. Her training manual didn't have a chapter for this. Her composure, the carefully constructed wall of professional deference, finally cracked. She looked directly at Penelope Davenport, not as a waitress to a customer, but as one woman to another. Her voice when she spoke did not tremble. It was quiet, but it carried across the silent restaurant with absolute conviction. "That is not what happened," Khloe said. "You spilled the wine on yourself. I was nowhere near your glass." Penelope gasped, clutching her chest as if wounded. "How dare you call me a liar?" "I am not calling you a liar," Khloe continued, her gaze unwavering. "I am stating a fact. You have been looking for a reason to have me fired since the moment you sat down. You complained about the table, the water, the wine, the appetizers, and a main course that was cooked perfectly. You insulted my shoes, my ambition, and my character. And now you have manufactured this incident to complete your little power trip. A collective murmur went through the restaurant. Richard Davenport's face had gone from red to ashen gray. Penelope, for God's sake, stop. I am not a clumsy girl, Mrs. Davenport, Khloe pressed on, her voice gaining strength. I am a law student from Northwestern who is taking time off to pay for my father's cancer treatments. The dreadful shoes you mocked are what allow me to stand for 10 hours a day to make sure he gets the care he needs. The choices I've made, the ones you called pathetic, are the hardest and most important choices of my life, and I will not stand here and let you or anyone else degrade me for them. The silence in the room was now absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Mr. Harrison stared at Khloe, his mouth slightly agape. He had never seen her like this. She wasn't yelling or crying. She was delivering her testimony with the cool, incisive precision of a seasoned attorney. Penelope was momentarily stunned into silence, her face a storm of fury and disbelief. She had expected tears, apologies, groveling. She had not expected this quiet, unshakable dignity. You're fired, she finally spat, her voice a venomous hiss. Harrison, if you don't fire her this instant, we will ruin this establishment. My husband is Richard Davenport. Mr. Harrison was caught in an impossible position. The Davenports were wealthy, influential patrons. But Khloe's story had the unmistakable ring of truth. As he struggled with what to do, his eyes flickered toward the restaurant's entrance. The heavy oak door swung open, letting in a draft of the cool night air. A man stood framed in the doorway, tall and distinguished, with a mane of silver hair and a face that was both kind and commanding. He wore a simple but exquisitely tailored gray suit, and he surveyed the tense scene with an expression of mild confusion that quickly hardened into concern. Richard Davenport saw him first. All the color drained from his face. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Mr. Sterling? Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. What are you doing here? The name hung in the air, charged with significance. Robert Sterling. It was a name that opened doors and silenced boardrooms. He was the founder and CEO of Sterling Global Investments, a titan of industry, a legend in the world of finance, and most importantly, Richard Davenport's ultimate boss. His presence in the Gilded Sparrow on a Tuesday night was as unlikely as a snowstorm in July. Robert Sterling's sharp blue eyes took in the scene with the speed of a man accustomed to assessing complex situations in an instant. He saw the silent, staring patrons. He saw the visibly stressed manager. He saw Penelope Davenport, her face contorted in a mask of rage, a large red wine stain blooming on her chest. He saw his senior vice president, Richard Davenport, looking like he was about to have a coronary, and he saw the young waitress, Khloe, standing alone, her back straight, her expression a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. Richard, Sterling said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority as he walked towards their table. I was hoping for a quiet dinner. It seems I've walked into a bit of theater instead. What on earth is going on? Penelope, completely oblivious to the power dynamic at play, saw only a well-dressed older man, a potential new ally in her crusade. She immediately turned her potent charm on him. Thank goodness, a reasonable man, she said, plastering a look of wrong fragility onto her face. This waitress has been an absolute nightmare. She was rude, incompetent, and then, when I called her on it, she deliberately threw a glass of wine on me. Robert Sterling's gaze shifted from Penelope to Khloe. He didn't know her name, but he was a regular at the Gilded Sparrow. He favored it for its lack of pretense, a quiet place where he could eat a simple meal and read his briefs in peace. He recognized the young woman's face. He'd seen her here before, always efficient, always polite, always with a quiet warmth in her smile. Her current stance of defiant dignity didn't align with the picture Penelope was painting. Is that so? Sterling said, his tone non-committal. His eyes flickered back to Richard. Richard, is this what happened? Richard Davenport opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. He was trapped between his virago of a wife and the man who held his entire career in the palm of his hand. Lying to Robert Sterling was professional suicide. He had a legendary intolerance for dishonesty. Contradicting his wife in public would mean facing a private wrath of epic proportions. Well, it was a misunderstanding, Robert, Richard stammered, sweating through his expensive shirt. Things got a little heated. Heated? Penelope scoffed, rounding on her husband. Richard, don't be so weak. Tell him what she did. She assaulted me. I want her fired. Robert Sterling ignored Penelope completely now. His focus was entirely on Khloe. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a uniform, but the person inside it. He saw the faint tremor in her hands, the exhaustion in her eyes, but also the unyielding strength in her posture. Miss, he said, his voice softer now, but still commanding, I'd like to hear your side of the story. This was it, a chance to be heard by someone who seemed willing to listen, to actually see past the apron and the notepad. Khloe took a breath, marshaling her thoughts. She would not be hysterical like Penelope. She would be factual, calm, and clear, just as she would if she were presenting a case in court. My name is Khloe Evans, she began, her voice steady. Mr. and Mrs. Davenport have been my table for the last hour. Mrs. Davenport has been displeased with every aspect of the service. She sent back her main course, which I am certain was prepared correctly. She then made a series of very personal remarks about my life choices and my character. She paused, her eyes meeting Sterling's. A few moments ago, she accused me of spilling wine on her blouse. That is not true. I was clearing a breadbasket when she gestured with her glass and spilled it on herself. I believe it was a deliberate act to have me terminated from my position. Her statement was delivered without malice or embellishment. It was a simple recitation of the facts, the truth unadorned. Penelope let out a sound somewhere between a shriek and a laugh. It's her word against mine. And who are you going to believe? The wife of one of your top executives? Or some nameless, lying waitress? It was a fatal miscalculation. She had assumed Robert Sterling's allegiance would automatically lie with his own social and professional class. She had failed to understand the kind of man he was. Robert Sterling hadn't built a global empire by surrounding himself with sycophants and bullies. He valued character above all else. He called it the Sterling standard: integrity, humility, and accountability. In the last 5 minutes, Penelope Davenport had failed on all 3 counts. Sterling's expression hardened. A profound disappointment settled over his features. He looked at Richard Davenport, and for the first time that evening, Richard saw genuine, cold anger in his boss's eyes. Richard, Sterling said, his voice dangerously quiet, we were supposed to have dinner tomorrow night to finalize the Singapore expansion deal and discuss your promotion to the board. I'm afraid something has come up. Richard's face went white. The Singapore deal was his magnum opus, the culmination of a year's work. The promotion to the board was the dream he'd been chasing for a decade. In a single sentence, Robert Sterling had placed it all on the edge of a knife. Robert, please, Richard pleaded. This has nothing to do with business. It's just my wife. Your wife is a reflection of your judgment, Richard. Sterling cut him off, his voice like ice. The company we keep, the partners we choose, it all speaks to our character. He then turned his full attention back to Khloe. A strange, unreadable emotion flickered in his eyes, something deeper than mere sympathy. It was a look of profound, almost paternal concern. Mr. Harrison, Sterling said, addressing the manager, I trust you will not be taking any action against this young woman. Of course not, Mr. Sterling, Harrison replied immediately, immense relief washing over him. Good, Sterling nodded. He then looked at Khloe, and the world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them. You said your name is Khloe Evans? Yes, sir, she said, her heart still hammering in her chest. He held her gaze for a long moment, a silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. The pieces of a puzzle were clicking into place in his mind, connecting a series of painful private dots that no one else in that room could possibly see. Finally, he spoke, and the 2 words he said were not what anyone expected. They were quiet, freighted with a history Khloe couldn't comprehend, and they landed with the force of a thunderclap. My Khloe! The question, so soft yet so resonant, hung in the silent restaurant. My Khloe? It made no sense. Khloe stared at the powerful man before her, a complete stranger, and felt a disorienting wave of confusion. His use of the possessive my was intimate, familial. Her mind raced. Was he a friend of her father's from long ago? A distant relative she'd never met? Penelope Davenport, however, heard the question and interpreted it in the only way her mind could process. "Oh, I see what's going on here," she sneered, her voice dripping with insinuation. "You know this little waitress, don't you? Is she your mistress? Is that why you're defending her? Richard, are you seeing this? The hypocrisy." The accusation was so vile, so far from the complex emotion on Robert Sterling's face, that it served only to deepen her own grave. Robert didn't even grace her with a glance. His eyes, filled with a dawning, heartbreaking realization, were still locked on Khloe. "Your father," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "Is he James Evans, the history professor at the University of Chicago?" Khloe's breath hitched. A cold dread, mingled with profound confusion, crept up her spine. "Yes," she whispered. "How do you know my father?" Richard Davenport looked back and forth between his boss and the waitress, the gears of understanding slowly, horribly beginning to turn. He knew Sterling was a major benefactor of the university, but this felt far more personal. Robert Sterling seemed to be struggling for composure. He took a half step closer to Khloe, his commanding presence softening into something vulnerable. "James and we were roommates at Princeton, best friends. We were the best man at each other's weddings." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. The story had just taken a turn no one could have predicted. "I don't understand," Khloe said, her voice trembling. "My father, he's never mentioned you." A deep, painful sigh escaped Robert's lips. "No," he said, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment. "I imagine he wouldn't have. We had a falling out, years ago. A stupid, prideful argument about business and ethics. I wanted him to join me when I started my firm. He believed my ambition would corrupt me. I said his idealism would leave him penniless. We both said things we shouldn't have. And we let 30 years of silence grow between us." He looked back up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I followed his career from a distance. I knew he had a daughter. I read his books. I was a coward. I never picked up the phone. It's the greatest regret of my life." He finally turned to Richard and Penelope, his expression now one of cold, righteous fury. "And now I walk in here, tonight of all nights, to find the wife of one of my executives verbally abusing and trying to ruin the daughter of my oldest and dearest friend." The silence in the restaurant was now tomb-like. Penelope Davenport's face was a canvas of horrified disbelief. The waitress she had dismissed as pathetic, as a nameless nobody, was intimately connected to the most powerful man she had ever met. The world had turned upside down. The social hierarchy she worshipped had inverted with dizzying speed. "Robert, I had no idea," Richard stammered, his career flashing before his eyes. "Penelope didn't know. We are so sorry." "Sorry?" Robert's voice was low and dangerous. "Are you sorry for what you did? Or are you sorry because you got caught by me? There is a profound difference, Richard." He took a step towards their table, his presence looming over them. "I listened to what you said to her," he directed at Penelope, who flinched as if struck. "You attacked her choices, her ambition, her very worth as a human being, all to feel powerful for a few moments in a restaurant. You used your privilege as a weapon against someone you believed was beneath you, someone who couldn't fight back." He then looked at Khloe, his voice softening once more. "She said she was working to pay for her father's cancer treatments." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact he was piecing together. "James is sick?" Khloe's carefully constructed composure finally broke. A single tear traced a hot path down her cheek. She nodded, unable to speak. The look of pain on Robert Sterling's face was genuine and deep. "Pancreatic?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Khloe nodded again. Robert closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the blow. The stupid fight, the lost years, the wasted time, it all came crashing down on him. "All this time, he's been sick, and I didn't know. All this time, his daughter has been working herself to the bone while I've been..." He trailed off, the self-recrimination clear on his face. He opened his eyes and they were filled with a fearsome resolve. The unraveling of Penelope's lies was complete, but the night was about to move beyond mere exposure. It was about to enter a phase of reckoning. "Mr. Harrison," Robert called to the manager, who was standing frozen nearby, "please bring me the Davenports' check. They will be paying for their meal, including the branzino that was so inedible. They will also be leaving a 50% tip for Miss Evans' trouble. And then they will be leaving your establishment and will not be returning." It was not a request, it was a verdict. Penelope looked as if she might faint. Richard simply nodded, defeated. His wife's casual cruelty had just cost him everything. The deal, the promotion, and the respect of the man he admired most in the world. Robert Sterling then did something that shocked everyone. He reached out and gently placed a hand on Khloe's arm. "Take off your apron, Khloe," he said, his voice full of a warmth that felt like coming home. "You're done for the night. I'm taking you to see your father." Khloe stood frozen for a beat, the universe reordering itself around her. One moment, she was a waitress on the verge of being unjustly fired. The next, the most powerful man in the room was claiming a connection to her father and ordering her to leave her post. She numbly untied the crisp black apron from around her waist, her fingers fumbling with the knot. She folded it and placed it on the corner of a nearby serving station, a small, symbolic act of surrender and liberation. The Davenports watched this unfold in horrified silence. The check arrived, and Richard, without even looking at the total, slapped down a corporate black card. His hand trembled as he signed the slip, his signature a frantic, illegible scrawl. Penelope, for the first time in her life, seemed utterly speechless. Her face was pale, her makeup stark against her bloodless skin. She had built her entire identity on a foundation of wealth, status, and the power to intimidate. In the space of 10 minutes, Robert Sterling had demolished that foundation, leaving her exposed and powerless. As Khloe followed Robert towards the exit, he paused and turned back to face Richard one last time. The air crackled with unspoken finality. This was no longer just about a personal indiscretion. It had become a professional execution. "Richard," Robert began, his voice devoid of all warmth, "I founded Sterling Global on a simple principle. Character is our capital. We manage billions of dollars of other people's money. They don't just trust our strategies. They trust us. They trust our judgment, our integrity, our ability to see people for who they truly are." He gestured vaguely back towards Penelope, who was now gathering her purse with shaky hands, avoiding everyone's gaze. "Your judgment, as it turns out, is catastrophically flawed. You stood by and allowed this performance of cruelty to unfold. You enabled it. That tells me everything I need to know. You lack the spine and the moral clarity to be a leader at my firm. You certainly do not have the character required for a position on my board." The words were like hammer blows, each one landing with devastating precision. Richard visibly crumpled, the last bit of fight draining out of him. "The Singapore deal will be reassigned to Jennifer Lang's team in the morning," Robert continued, his voice like flint. "As for your own future at the firm, I suggest you take a long, hard look in the mirror and decide what kind of man you want to be. My assistant will be in touch with you tomorrow to discuss your options." The implication was clear. Resignation was the only honorable one left. With that, he turned his back on the Davenports, a final cutting dismissal. He placed a steadying hand on the small of Khloe's back and guided her out of the restaurant, leaving the humiliated couple in the wreckage of their evening and, quite possibly, their life. The cool night air of the Chicago streets felt like a balm on Khloe's flushed skin. A black town car with a driver waiting patiently pulled up to the curb as if summoned by magic. The driver, a stout man with a kind face, opened the rear door. "The hospital, Arthur," Robert said as they slid onto the plush leather seats. "University of Chicago Medical Center." The car pulled silently into traffic, cocooning them in a world of quiet luxury. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Khloe stared out the window at the blurred city lights, her mind trying to process the whiplash of the last hour. She felt a strange mix of vindication, sorrow, and a deep, unsettling confusion. Finally, Robert broke the silence. "He really never mentioned me?" he asked, his voice laced with a genuine sadness. "No, sir," Khloe said quietly. He doesn't talk much about his college days. He always said the past is a place to learn from, not to live in." Robert managed a small, sad smile. That sounds like James. Always the stoic professor. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Khloe, what your father and I had, it was more than friendship. We were brothers. After my parents died in a car crash my sophomore year, his family took me in. I spent holidays, summers with them. They were more my family than my own. He recounted the story of their argument, filling in the details. It was a classic clash of ideologies. Robert, the pragmatic, ambitious capitalist, and James, the principled, cautious academic. Words were exchanged that cut too deep. Pride got in the way of apologies, and the chasm of silence grew wider with each passing year. I am so ashamed, Robert confessed, his powerful voice cracking with emotion. To think of him suffering, of you struggling like this, all because of my stubborn pride. There are no words. Khloe listened, a lifetime of questions about her father's past suddenly being answered by this stranger in a limousine. She was seeing a new side of her father, a young man with a best friend, a man with passions and arguments that shaped the rest of his life. It's not your fault, she found herself saying, a surprising wave of empathy washing over her. He's just as proud as you are. Robert looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a mixture of grief and gratitude. You're his daughter, all right. Just as gracious and strong. They arrived at the hospital, its sterile, imposing facade a familiar sight to Khloe. Robert insisted on coming in, on seeing his old friend, no matter the circumstances. They walked through the quiet, antiseptic-smelling corridors to the oncology ward. Khloe paused outside her father's room, her heart pounding. She pushed the door open gently. Her father was asleep, looking frail and small in the oversized hospital bed. Her mother was dozing in the uncomfortable armchair beside him, a book fallen into her lap. As they stepped quietly into the room, James Evans's eyes fluttered open, as if sensing a change in the atmosphere. He blinked, adjusting to the dim light. His gaze fell on Khloe, and a weak smile touched his lips. Then he looked past her, at the tall, silver-haired man standing in the doorway. Recognition dawned, followed by a storm of emotions that washed over his tired features. Shock, disbelief, anger, and then, underneath it all, a flicker of something that looked like relief. "Robert?" James Evans whispered, his voice raspy. "Is that really you?" Robert Sterling stepped forward into the light, his own face a portrait of regret and hope. "Hello, Jamie," he said, using a nickname no one had used in 30 years. "I think we have a lot of catching up to do." The hospital room felt charged with the weight of 3 decades of unspoken words. Khloe's mother, Helen, had woken with a start, her expression mirroring her husband's shock at the sight of Robert Sterling. But as the initial tense silence gave way to a halting conversation, the frost of old wounds began to thaw. Robert, stripped of his CEO persona, was simply a man consumed with regret, apologizing not with grand gestures, but with the quiet, broken sincerity of a friend who knew he had been wrong. He recounted the story of what had happened at the restaurant, his voice filled with fury as he described Penelope's cruelty and deep admiration as he described Khloe's strength and dignity. James listened, his gaze shifting between his old friend and his daughter, a dawning pride in his eyes that seemed to give him a new strength. "She always had a spine of steel," James rasped, reaching a thin hand out towards Khloe, who took it immediately. "She gets it from her mother." Helen, who had been listening with a mixture of astonishment and indignation, finally spoke. "That poor woman," she said, shaking her head. And for a moment, Khloe thought she meant Penelope. "No, not her," Helen clarified, seeing her daughter's confusion. "I mean a woman so empty inside that her only source of power comes from trying to hurt a girl like you. It's just sad." In that moment, Khloe realized the anger she'd been holding on to had vanished, replaced by a profound pity. Her mother was right. Penelope Davenport wasn't a monster. She was just a hollow, unhappy person. The real victory wasn't her public humiliation, but Khloe's own refusal to let that bitterness take root in her heart. Robert stayed for over an hour, the conversation flowing more easily as the years of silence fell away. He didn't make grand, sweeping promises. Instead, he asked questions. He wanted to know about the treatments, the doctors, the prognosis. He listened with the focused intensity of a man used to solving complex problems. Before he left, he turned to Khloe. "I've already spoken to my foundation's medical director," he said quietly. "He is one of the best oncologists in the country. He's going to be reviewing your father's case first thing in the morning. We will get him the best care in the world, Khloe. Whatever it takes, consider it done." He then looked at Helen. "And you will not worry about a single bill. From this moment on, that is my burden to carry. It's the very least I can do." The offer was so immense, so life-altering, that it left them speechless. It was the lifting of a weight so crushing they hadn't realized how much it had been suffocating them. "As for you," Robert said, his eyes on Khloe, "your deferment from Northwestern is over. You will be re-enrolling for the spring semester. Your tuition and living expenses will be taken care of. The world needs more lawyers with your brand of courage and integrity." Khloe was about to protest, to insist she could manage, but she saw the look on his face. This wasn't charity, it was penance. It was his way of trying to repair the past, to be the friend he should have been all along. To refuse would be to deny him that. "Thank you, Robert," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means more than you know." The days that followed were a whirlwind. True to his word, Robert Sterling moved mountains. James was transferred to a private wing and consulted by a team of the world's leading cancer specialists who started him on a new, cutting-edge immunotherapy treatment. For the first time in months, there was a glimmer of genuine hope. News of the incident at the Gilded Sparrow spread through the city's elite circles like wildfire. The Davenports became social pariahs overnight. Richard quietly resigned from Sterling Global, taking a leave of absence that everyone knew was permanent. Their carefully constructed world of influence and prestige had shattered. The last Khloe heard, Penelope had retreated from the public eye entirely, her reputation in tatters. A week later, Khloe walked into the Gilded Sparrow, not in her uniform, but in jeans and a sweater. She had come to give Mr. Harrison her 2 weeks' notice. He greeted her with a warm smile and a handshake. "We were sorry to lose you, Khloe," he said, "but I think your future is much brighter outside these walls. You should know, you've become something of a legend among the staff here." She smiled, feeling a pang of nostalgia for the camaraderie of the place. Before she left, she saw a young waitress, Sarah, the hostess from that night, looking stressed as she dealt with a particularly demanding customer. On impulse, Khloe walked over to the service station, poured a glass of water, and brought it to the table with a reassuring smile. She gave Sarah a small, encouraging nod. The torch had been passed. Her last act wasn't as a law student or the friend of a billionaire, but as a waitress, showing a small act of kindness to someone walking the same path she had. Walking out of the restaurant for the last time, Khloe felt the crisp autumn air on her face. The city lights of Chicago sparkled around her, no longer just a backdrop for her exhaustion, but a landscape of promise. She hadn't sought revenge or drama, but by standing up for her own dignity, she had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that had not only saved her family, but had also reconnected two old friends and taught an unforgettable lesson about the true nature of wealth and worth. Her dreams, the ones she had so carefully packed away, were no longer in a dusty box. They were right in front of her, waiting to be claimed, and she was ready. That night in the restaurant, a simple confrontation over a spilled glass of wine became a powerful lesson in humility, character, and the invisible battles people fight every day. Khloe's story reminds us that the titles we hold and the money we have are fleeting, but our integrity, how we treat people when we think no one of consequence is watching, is what truly defines us. It's a testament to the idea that quiet dignity can be more powerful than the loudest insults, and that true strength isn't about how high you can climb, but how you lift others up, especially those who serve you. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that explore the moments that change our lives forever. Thank you for listening.